in the heart of Colorado's wildlife reserve, where the sun scorches the endless plains. Shadows gathered for a ruthless fight no one expected, not between humans or machines, but between two forces of nature that had learned to clash over survival. 80 hyenas, driven by scarcity and instinct, stood against 20 lions, the apex rulers of the terrain. This wasn't mere predation. It was a escalating struggle sparked by drought in 2018, forcing both sides into brutal encounters at dwindling water sources. Kyle Harlan, a 45-year-old ranger biologist, with years patrolling these lands, first spotted the signs while on routine surveys. Radioing in, "This is turning ruthless. We've got raids on young ones already." What ignited this conflict would become one of the most intense survival battles in wildlife history. For months, hyenas led by Thor swarmed lion dens at dusk, dragging fragile cubs into the night with coordinated bites and howls that echoed like warnings. In retaliation, lions under Aslan charged back, their roars shaking the ground as they targeted hyena juveniles, swiping with raw power that left scars deep and lasting. Ruby, a fierce hyena defender, hurled rocks from rocky perches, forcing lions to retreat under a hail of debris, while Nulla, a lioness coordinator, flanked her pride to strike at exposed flanks, turning open grasslands into ambush zones. The tension built relentlessly. Hyenas exploited their numbers, overwhelming isolated lions with frenzied attacks that tested every inch of territory. Lions countered with ferocity, their charges scattering packs and claiming waterholes marked by ancestors' claims. Kyle noted one clash where a hyena pack surged forward, only for a lion swipe to send several tumbling. Yet the survivors pressed on, barking challenges that unnerved even the strongest. "We've never seen adaptation like this," Kyle muttered during a log entry, as the cries merged into a symphony of raw struggle. But before we dive deeper into this survival story, tell me what time it is, where you are, and which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this tale of nature's ruthless struggle has traveled. Drop a comment with your thoughts on this wild conflict, and subscribe now for more gripping wildlife insights that reveal the raw side of survival. The rivalry ignited in late 2018 amid Colorado's severe drought cycle. Water sources shrank to muddy puddles, forcing animals across the reserve into tighter contact than ever before. Prey like deer and antelope migrated farther north, leaving the hyenas and lions with fewer options. Thor, the dominant hyena with scarred flanks from past fights, led his clan toward the remaining pools, where lions under Aslan had already staked their claim. The first real clash came at dusk near a shallow basin in the southern plains. A group of hyenas, driven by hunger, approached a resting lion pair guarding two cubs. The hyenas circled slowly at first, testing the air with low whoops, then surged forward in a coordinated wave. They targeted the cubs, snapping and pulling, while the adult lions roared and swiped. One lioness lunged, catching a hyena by the leg and flinging it aside. But the pack's numbers overwhelmed the pair. In seconds, they dragged one cub into the brush, its cries cut short. The lions pursued, but the hyenas melted into the rocky edges, scattering and regrouping. Aslan arrived with reinforcements, his mane dark with dust, and the pride retaliated the next night. They ambushed a smaller hyena group foraging alone. Charging from the tall grass, Aslan led the assault, his massive paws crushing bones as he took down two juveniles. The surviving hyenas fled, howling in rage. But the message was clear. Neither side would back down. These early incidents set the pattern. Hyenas raided dens when lions were away, hunting, using their speed and teamwork to strike fast and vanish. Lions responded by patrolling wider territories, waiting in ambush for hyena stragglers. Vocalizations carried across the reserve. Hyena, whoops, rising in pitch. Lion roars deep and resonant, creating an atmosphere of constant threat. Kyle Harlan and Sarah Jennings, monitoring from a distant ridge, recorded the patterns on their equipment. Kyle noted the increasing frequency of encounters, while Sarah logged the first injuries. A lioness with bite wounds on her flank, a hyena with a broken jaw. The drought deepened through winter into spring, and the clashes grew more frequent. At one waterhole, hyenas arrived in force, 30 strong, and forced a lioness to retreat after she attempted to drink. They bit at her heels, drawing blood, until she roared for backup. Aslan's arrival turned the tide. He charged through the pack, scattering them with powerful swipes that left several limping. Yet the hyenas returned the following day, bolder, using the cover of boulders to launch surprise attacks. Thor directed from the high ground, his calls guiding the clan to flank and harass. One hyena grabbed a lion cub during a brief lapse in vigilance, dragging it toward the rocks, while the mother lioness fought off 3 attackers. The pride rallied, but the cub was lost. The lions then struck back at dawn, targeting a hyena nursery area. They moved in silent formation, Nala leading the females while Aslan flanked. They caught the hyenas off guard, killing several young before the adults could mount a defense. The hyenas counterattacked with fury, leaving the basin littered with signs of the struggle. The cycle continued relentlessly. Each raid provoked a counter-raid. Each injury fueled more aggression. By mid-Langchen Ling Ishizhou, the reserve's waterholes had become battlegrounds. Animals that once shared them peacefully now avoided the areas entirely. Sensing the danger, the hyenas, with their larger numbers, began to dominate the edges, using their speed to harass lions from afar. Lions, relying on strength, pushed back whenever they could close the distance. One particularly fierce encounter occurred near a dry riverbed. A hyena pack cornered a lone lioness separated from the pride. They circled, whooping and snapping, wearing her down with repeated lunges. She fought valiantly, taking down 2 hyenas with precise swipes. But the numbers proved too great. She retreated, bleeding, limping toward safety. Aslan's response was swift. The pride tracked the pack back to their resting site and launched a full assault. They charged in waves, Aslan at the front, tearing through the hyenas' defenses. Several hyenas fell, their bodies left in the dust. The pack scattered, but Thor regrouped them quickly, refusing to yield ground. These early clashes hardened both sides. Hyenas learned to strike in larger groups, coordinating their movements to overwhelm. Lions learned to protect their young more vigilantly, using coordinated patrols to deter raids. The vocalizations grew louder, echoing farther across the plains. A constant reminder of the struggle, rangers documented every incident, building a record of the escalating conflict. Kyle and Sarah spent long hours reviewing footage, noting how the drought was turning ordinary survival into something more intense. The reserve, once a place of natural balance, now pulsed with tension, as 2 formidable species pushed each other to the limit. The pattern was clear. Every loss was repaid, every territory contested. The drought showed no sign of breaking, and the encounters only increased in frequency and ferocity. What began as isolated raids had evolved into a pattern of retaliation that neither side could escape. The stage was set for something larger, as both hyenas and lions adapted to the new reality of shared scarcity. The reserve's plains bore witness to this growing struggle, with tracks and blood marking the ground where survival was being redefined. Kyle continued his observations, aware that the conflict was far from over, as the animals pressed on in their ruthless fight for every drop of water and every scrap of food. By early 2019, hyenas merged into a pack of 80 under Thor's lead. The scattered clans that once competed for scraps now moved as one unit, driven by the ongoing pressure of shrinking resources. Thor positioned himself at the center, his calls sharp and commanding, directing the group with precision born from necessity. Ruby took charge of the front line, her spotted coat blending with the dry grass as she organized the bolder males into charging lines. Females stayed back with the young, forming protective circles, while scouts climbed higher ground for vantage points. This shift allowed the hyenas to operate with military-like efficiency, turning their natural numbers into a tactical advantage against the stronger lions. The pack began reclaiming ridges, overlooking key water sources, areas previously dominated by lion patrols. From these elevated positions, they could spot approaching threats long before the lions drew near. When a small lion subgroup ventured too close, the hyenas unleashed volleys of rocks and branches, the projectiles tumbling down slopes with enough force to bruise and deter. The lions scattered under the barrage, forced to retreat while the pack's whoops rose in triumphant chorus. Thor watched from the crest, his posture tense but steady, as the hyenas consolidated their hold on the high ground. Mass waves became their signature move. The entire pack advanced in loose formation, spreading wide to cover more territory in minutes. They stripped shrubs, bare of leaves and insects, overwhelming any small prey before lions could claim it. This rapid foraging reduced exposure time, making ambushes harder for the pride. When lions tried to interrupt, the hyenas pivoted seamlessly, Ruby leading a flanking charge to draw attention while the main body continued the sweep. The lions found themselves facing a wall of snapping jaws, unable to isolate individuals without risking encirclement. Exploiting fragmentation proved especially effective. Whenever the lions' patrols stretched thin across the plains, the hyenas struck at the edges. A lone lioness straying from the group became a prime target. The pack swarmed from multiple directions, biting at her legs to slow her. Then, piling on with relentless pressure, she fought back valiantly, shaking off attackers and landing solid kicks. But the sheer volume wore her down until she limped away bleeding. The hyenas pressed the advantage, raiding abandoned kill sites and dragging remnants to their ridges for safety. These tactics came at a cost. The large pack competed internally for every morsel, leading to brief squabbles over food. Weaker members sometimes lagged during movements, creating momentary gaps that lions exploited with quick strikes. Yet the unity held firm when threats appeared. Rivalries dissolved instantly, replaced by coordinated defense. Thor enforced discipline with low growls, keeping the group focused amid the strain. Rangers Kyle Harlan and Sarah Jennings observed these developments from a safe distance, their notes filling with details of the pack's evolving behavior. Kyle remarked on the remarkable cohesion, while Sarah documented the toll on younger hyenas left vulnerable during internal disputes. The hyenas' adaptation reshaped the landscape. Ridges, once quiet, now echoed with constant activity, and the lions' traditional hunting routes grew riskier. The pack's confidence grew with each successful defense. They began probing deeper into lion territory, testing boundaries with probing raids that forced the pride to respond more aggressively. One evening, Ruby led a group of 20 to harass a lioness near a narrow gully. They hurled debris from above, forcing her to dodge while the rest closed in from the sides. The fight was short, but intense. The lion's power prevailed, scattering the hyenas and claiming the area without pursuit. These encounters reinforced the lion's dominance in open spaces. The pride adapted by incorporating more flanking maneuvers, using the terrain to their benefit. Aslan's leadership kept them disciplined, and Nala's coordination ensured no weakness went unaddressed. The hyenas faced a more formidable opponent, one that could strike with devastating speed and force whenever the plains offered room to maneuver. The lion's roars now served as both warning and weapon, sowing doubt before any physical clash. The pride's unity allowed them to absorb losses and press on, turning every encounter into a lesson in power. The conflict grew more balanced, with the lions reclaiming control over the flat expanses that defined the reserve. Clashes ramped up in 2020 near rocky outcrops, setting the stage for full conflict. The reserve's terrain became the silent arbiter of every encounter, with steep cliffs and jagged boulders turning ordinary pursuits into life or death traps. Hyenas learned to lure lions toward these natural barriers, where a misstep meant a fall or a cornered position with no escape. Lions countered by drawing opponents into the flat expanses, where their speed and power could overwhelm without obstruction. This push and pull hardened both sides' resolve, transforming isolated raids into a pattern of deliberate, organized hostility that neither could ignore. One morning near a narrow ridgeline, a lioness separated from the pride during a patrol. The hyenas spotted her quickly and moved in. Thor's signals guided them to encircle her position, cutting off retreat paths while Ruby led the initial rush. The lioness backed against the cliff face, her back to the drop. Snarling as the pack closed, she lunged at the nearest hyena, landing a solid bite that sent it rolling. But the numbers pressed from every angle. The terrain worked against her. Loose rocks shifted under her paws, and the cliff edge limited her maneuvers. She held them off for minutes, roaring for help, until the pack overwhelmed her flanks. She escaped by leaping down a shallow drop, limping away with deep gashes along her side. The hyenas whooping in pursuit until they reached the edge. The lions struck back that same week, focusing on a hyena nursery tucked in a shallow basin. Aslan led the pride in a wide arc, using the open ground to build speed. Nala positioned the females to block escape routes, while the males advanced directly. The hyenas guarding the young scattered at first, but several stood their ground, forming a defensive line. The lions charged through, Aslan's powerful stride carrying him over the first defenders. Swipes cleared space, and the pride took several juveniles before the main pack could rally. The hyenas counterattacked from the sides, biting at the lions' heels. But the open terrain favored the pride's mobility. They withdrew with their prizes, leaving the basin littered with signs of the struggle. These incidents built momentum. Hyenas began swarming isolated lions more frequently, using the rocky outcrops for cover during approaches. In one case, a young lion wandered too far during a hunt. The pack moved in from multiple directions, overwhelming him with coordinated lunges. He fought back, taking down 2 attackers, but the sheer volume pinned him against a boulder. The fight ended quickly, his roars fading as the hyenas dragged him away. Carcasses from these clashes started appearing more often, bodies left uneaten in some spots. Others, partially consumed, but marked by excessive wounds that spoke of retaliation rather than hunger. The ground bore the evidence. Blood trails leading to rocky shelters, broken vegetation where charges had torn through. The symphony of cries grew constant. Hyena whoops rose in urgency during raids, answered by lion roars that rolled across the plains like thunder. The sounds blended at night, creating an unsettling chorus that kept every creature on edge. Lions hardened their patrols, moving with more caution around elevated ground, while hyenas grew bolder in using the cliffs for strategic advantage. One dusk encounter saw hyenas corner a lioness near a steep incline. They forced her upward, where the narrow path limited her turns. She backed slowly, swiping at the advancing line, but the pack pressed relentlessly. A rock dislodged under her paw, and she slipped, tumbling partway down. The hyenas followed, but she regained footing and fought her way free, escaping with injuries that slowed her for days. The lions responded with precision. Aslan organized a counter near a flat clearing bordered by low boulders. When a hyena group probed for weakness, the pride waited hidden. Nala signaled the rush, and the lions burst out in waves. Aslan targeted the lead hyena, his charge scattering the front line. The females flanked, cutting off retreat and forcing the group into a tight cluster. Swipes landed with crushing impact, and the hyenas broke apart in disarray. Several escaped into the rocks, but the lions claimed the area, reinforcing their control over the contested zone. Rangers Kyle Harlan and Sarah Jennings tracked these shifts from observation points, noting the changing patterns in their logs. Kyle recorded the increasing use of terrain as a weapon, while Sarah documented the rising injury rates on both sides. The ecological balance tilted. Prey animals avoided the contested zones entirely, leaving the reserve quieter in places where life once thrived. The clashes now carried a weight beyond survival, with each side showing clear signs of hardened resolve. Hyenas no longer scattered easily, and lions no longer hunted alone. The stage had been set for something larger. As the conflict moved toward its inevitable peak, the Ruthless peak erupted in late 2021 at the dwindling reservoir. Hyenas had claimed the surrounding ridges days earlier, turning the elevated ground into a fortified position with sentinels posted on every outcrop. Lions advanced from the plains below, dust kicking up under their paws as Aslan positioned the pride in a deliberate line. Flanks secured by Nala's females. Roars rolled from the lion's side, low and resonant, while hyena whoops answered from above, sharp and chaotic. The air thickened with tension as both sides eyed the shallow water below, the last reliable source in the parched reserve. Chaos unfolded at dusk when the first hyena wave surged down the slopes. Thor directed the descent, his calls piercing the twilight, sending 80 bodies in a grey torrent toward the lions. They swarmed the pride's front, snapping at legs and dodging swipes, their numbers creating a living barrier that pushed the lions back. Aslan countered with a thunderous charge, his body slamming into the leading hyenas, scattering several with bone. Crushing force, teeth flashed in the fading light. Hyenas latching onto lion flanks while lions shook them off with violent twists. Rocks cascaded from the ridges above, hurled by Ruby's group, striking lions mid-stride and forcing them to weave through the barrage. A sudden rain shower hit without warning, turning the dry soil into slippery mud that bogged down movements. Hyenas adapted quickly, using the slick terrain to their advantage by luring lions towards softer patches where paws sank deep. Thor's scouts feigned retreats, drawing a lion subgroup into a muddy hollow. Then, circling back to trap them, the lions struggled for footing. Their charges slowed as hyenas pounced from firmer ground. Thor's scouts feigned retreats, drawing a lion subgroup into a muddy hollow. Then circling back to trap them, the lions struggled for footing. Their charges slowed as hyenas pounced from firmer ground. Aslan rallied the pride with a heroic counter, breaking through the encirclement by leaping over sunk hyenas and leading a wedge formation that punched a hole in the pack. Nala followed, her lionesses forming a protective ring around the vulnerable, their swipes clearing paths through the mud. Momentary betrayal rippled through hyena ranks from hunger. A few weaker members hesitated during a surge, turning on each other for a fallen comrade's share, creating gaps that lions exploited. The blood scent mixed with wet dust, hanging heavy in the air, fueling the frenzy as cries echoed for miles across the reserve. Waves of attacks ebbed and flowed. Hyenas pressed forward in relentless pulses, overwhelming isolated lions with sheer volume, while lions held lines with bursts of power, their roars drowning out the whoops temporarily. Losses mounted steadily. Hyenas fell to the lion's superior strength, bodies crumpling under repeated swipes that shattered limbs and spines. Lions took wounds from the endless numbers, gashes accumulating until movement slowed, blood matting fur and blending with the mud. Screams blended into terror, a cacophony of pain and defiance that shook the surrounding wildlife into silence. Ruby defended a cluster of young hyenas fiercely, positioning herself at a narrow ridge pass, biting and clawing at any lion that approached, her efforts buying time for the pack to regroup. Nala coordinated desperate strikes from the lion's core, directing females to target hyena leaders in pinpoint assaults that disrupted the swarms. The confrontation dragged through the night. Hyenas lured lions into more traps, using fallen logs and mud pits to trip charges, while Aslan's pride rallied for another heroic push, breaking through a hyena line to reach the reservoir's edge briefly. Sensory overload dominated. The metallic tang of blood, the slick grip of mud under paws, the endless echoes of cries piercing the rain. The hyena's waves continued, ebbing when lions held firm, flowing when gaps appeared. Lions, wounded by the relentless assaults, pushed back with raw determination, their numbers dwindling but resolve unbroken. Bodies strewn across the slopes told the story of mounting costs, survivors on both sides pressing the brink with every clash. The reservoir's banks turned into a churned battlefield. Hyenas surged again, Thor at the vanguard, aiming to drive the lions from the water entirely. Aslan met them head-on, his counter leading to a tangled melee where teeth and claws flashed non-stop. Ruby's defense held a key flank, her bites repelling lion advances, while Nala's strikes disrupted hyena coordination. Forcing retreats, the rain eased, but the mud remained treacherous, claiming more victims as slips led to fatal exposures. The peak's terror peaked in these moments, with waves crashing like tides, losses accumulating until exhaustion set in for the weary fighters. Dawn in early 2022 exposed the confrontation's heavy toll. The reservoir's banks lay churned into a muddy wasteland, the water's edge now a patchwork of trampled soil and scattered debris. Fractured hyena pack members limped away from the ridges, their once coordinated movements broken into small, disorganized groups that moved slowly across the plains. Thor led what remained of his core clan, his scarred body showing fresh wounds, while Ruby stayed close to the surviving young, guiding them toward distant cover. The pack that had once surged as one now scattered in search of safer ground. The unity strained to its limit. Injured lions made their way back to the pride's core territory. Each step deliberate and labored. Aslan walked at the head, his mane matted with dried mud and blood. A deep gash across his shoulder, slowing his usual stride. Nala flanked him, her own flank marked by multiple bites, keeping the remaining females and young in tight formation. The pride's numbers had visibly thinned, with several members trailing behind, favoring legs or sides that bore the marks of relentless hyena assaults. They moved toward a shaded grove, away from the contested reservoir, where the air still carried the faint metallic scent of the previous night's violence. The landscape bore silent testimony to the scale of the struggle. Blood-stained rocks dotted the slopes. Dark patches dried into the stone where fighters had fallen. Broken branches and torn vegetation littered the ground. Remnants of charges and retreats that had torn through the sparse cover. Carcasses lay scattered along the edges of the water, some partially covered by mud, others exposed under the rising sun. Hyena bodies slumped near the ridges, their spotted coats dulled by dust, while lion forms rested in the open plains. Massive frames, now still, scavengers circled overhead, drawn by the sudden abundance. But even they approached cautiously, sensing the lingering danger. The reserve fell into an unnatural silence. Prey species that once grazed near the reservoir now avoided the area entirely, their tracks veering wide around the scarred ground. Birds that had filled the air with calls during calmer days stayed quiet, perching on distant trees rather than venturing close. The waterhole itself, once a gathering point, stood deserted, its surface rippled only by wind. The echoes of the previous night's cries had faded, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed across the plains. Kyle Harlan and his team arrived at first light. Moving carefully through the aftermath, Kyle led the group, notebook in hand, while Sarah Jennings followed with medical supplies and recording equipment. Nathan Brooks joined from the main station, his face set in grim focus as they documented the scene. They photographed the strewn remains, noting positions and conditions, then collected samples from the bloodied areas for later analysis. Kyle knelt beside a fallen hyena, examining the wounds without disturbing the body, while Sarah measured the spacing of tracks to estimate the intensity of movement. Their work proceeded methodically, logging data on the toll to both populations, the changes in behavior patterns, and the altered use of the landscape. Local stories began circulating soon after. Park staff who lived nearby spoke in low voices about the night sounds that had carried to their stations, the prolonged roars and whoops that had kept sleep at bay. Guides passing through the reserve recounted the scene to visitors, describing the way the ground had seemed to shake with the weight of the conflict. These accounts spread quietly among the community, adding layers to the event that rangers had witnessed firsthand. The stories carried a sense of awe mixed with unease, as people realized how deeply the struggle had reshaped the reserve. The fractured hyena groups dispersed further over the following days, some heading toward peripheral water sources, others simply vanishing into the more remote sections. Thor's leadership held the remnants together, but the pack's cohesion had suffered visibly. With fewer members responding to calls, the lions regrouped in their grove, licking wounds and resting. Aslan and Nala keeping watch over the survivors. The pride's patrols would resume eventually, but with caution born from the cost. Rangers continued their analysis, mapping the affected zones and tracking the movements of both species as they withdrew. Kyle reviewed footage from trail cameras, noting the patterns of retreat and the way the animals now avoided the reservoir entirely. Sarah prepared reports on the injury types, highlighting the cumulative impact of the prolonged engagement. The team worked in shifts, ensuring continuous monitoring without disturbing the recovery process. The silence deepened across the reserve. Fewer tracks appeared near the old battleground, and the vegetation began to reclaim small patches of churned earth. The carcasses drew scavengers, but the area remained largely empty of larger animals. As if the land itself needed time to heal, local narratives grew, with staff sharing details in break rooms and guides incorporating the event into their tours, always with a tone of respect for the raw power of nature. The toll extended beyond the visible. The reserve's balance had shifted, with both hyenas and lions now operating in smaller, more cautious formations. Rangers documented these changes carefully, aware that the confrontation had marked a turning point in the ongoing struggle for resources. With rainfall easing by mid-Lang Chen Ling Arsha A, rangers like Kyle intervened. The first significant showers arrived in early summer, replenishing smaller pools and easing the pressure on the main reservoir. Kyle Harlan coordinated the response from the central station, working closely with Sarah Jennings and Nathan Brooks to assess the populations. Teams set up temporary monitoring posts around the reserve, using radio collars and trail cameras to track movements. The goal was clear: prevent further losses by relocating portions of both groups to less contested areas, allowing the ecosystem to regain stability. Relocation began with the hyenas. Kyle's team darted several individuals from Thor's fractured pack, including some of the younger members showing signs of malnutrition. Transports moved them to a northern sector with more reliable water and fewer overlapping territories. The process required careful timing. Hyenas were captured at dawn when activity was lower, sedated briefly for safety, and released into scouted zones with natural cover. Ruby's group, still protective of the remaining young, proved challenging. Rangers used bait stations to draw them in gradually. Over several weeks, about 30 hyenas were moved, reducing density around the old reservoir and giving the survivors space to recover without constant pressure. The lions required a different approach. Aslan's pride had withdrawn to a shaded valley, where injuries healed slowly under natural conditions. Kyle decided against full relocation for the core group, opting instead to supplement food sources temporarily with monitored carcasses to build strength. Nala's lionesses, still coordinating the females, responded well to the aid, their patrols growing steadier as energy returned. A few younger lions with severe wounds were tranquilized and treated at a field clinic run by Sarah, then returned to the pride after recovery. This targeted support allowed the lions to reclaim parts of their original range without forcing a complete shift. These actions restored a fragile balance. The reserve's water sources began to stabilize, and prey populations returned to the fringes of the old conflict zone. Hyenas in the new northern areas reformed smaller clans, their whoops less urgent, while lions resumed hunts with renewed coordination. The relocation effort succeeded in preventing extinction, level losses, giving both species a chance to adapt without the constant drain of combat. The event became a key study in wildlife management. Researchers analyzed the data Kyle's team collected, publishing findings on adaptation under scarcity. The hyenas demonstrated how social unity could offset physical disadvantages, while the lions showed the value of strategic power and endurance. The conflict highlighted the limits of natural competition when resources dwindle rapidly. serving as a case study for reserves facing similar climate pressures. Kyle reflected on the experience during a final briefing. This struggle showed us that nature can push species to extremes, but humans have the responsibility to step in when the balance tips too far. Climate change amplified the scarcity here, and without our intervention, one side could have had collapsed entirely. We need to protect these ecosystems actively, support conservation programs, reduce emissions, and monitor reserves closely. Every action counts toward keeping the wild resilient. The reserve slowly recovered. Vegetation regrew on the churned banks, and animals returned cautiously to the water. The story of the confrontation spread among conservation circles, a reminder of how quickly harmony can fracture and how deliberate effort can mend it. Kyle and his team continued their work, knowing the lesson extended beyond this place. Endurance in the face of scarcity teaches balance, and collective action on the environment offers the best path forward.